jump into it then.
So yeah.
Alrighty. Hi everyone, welcome to 101. I'm your host DJ Placebo. As always, this is a segment of the Bad Radio Show, which you can catch every Wednesday morning from 8 to 10 a.m. So today I'm joined by none other than Stanley Dubinsky, aka Dr. Stan, a linguist here at the university. So do you want to get started and just tell me a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Where should we? How far back should we go?
Really just like deepest, darkest traumas,
Darkest
deepest, darkest secret. Maybe just how did you get into linguistics?
How did I get into linguistics? That's a good question, and that will take us really far back, okay? Because if you want to come down to it, I got to linguistics circuitously. Mm-hmm. Started out in high school and before high school, just completely obsessed with science. Borrowing my uncle's physics textbooks when I was in 7th grade, presenting to my 9th grade class on Kornikov radiation, nobody knew what the hell it was.
Oh, wow.
All this kind of stuff, yeah. So doing a lot of science, thought I was going to be a particle physicist. Mm-hmm. Then I got as far as 10th grade, and then I had a really, really fine English teacher who introduced us to poetry. Mm-hmm. And I decided, well, gee, I really love poetry and I want to write poetry, and I started to write, and writing became the thing. And by the time I got to college, it was all about creation. It was all about creative stuff. I was taking music theory, I was taking music lessons, I was in modern dance classes and performances, I was in theater, I built a set for Arthur Miller's Crucible, and was in that production, and and writing classes, all crazy, like for about 3 semesters until I ran out of money and steam. And but I had told everyone that would listen to me that I wasn't there to get a degree anyway. I was just there to learn what I wanted to learn, and I was going to move on. And I did, and I moved on. I did some traveling after that. I worked for the post office for a year, got my head around the idea that I wanted to learn language. Mm-hmm. And for some reason, and this is where it starts to get into, sort of veer into linguistics, mm-hmm. It struck me that the only way I was ever going to really be able to be a really good writer would be if I understood my own language better. Mm-hmm. And the only way I could understand language better would be to learn one or two from the outside.
Okay.
Right?
No, that makes sense.
In other words, like you're in your own language all the time. You never see it from the outside, but if you learn another language, and this in particular case was Spanish, I said, I'll learn Spanish. Growing up in New York, Spanish was sort of a natural because you're surrounded by a minority population of Spanish speakers. And so I had been doing that. I happened in 1973 to go to Israel, mm-hmm. on the occasion of there being a war. Yeah. And I volunteered to go over there. And I spent about 4 months on a kibbutz and decided that I really was amazed by the place, and I was mostly amazed by Jerusalem. And I wanted to figure out a way to get back. And being of that age, the way to go back, the way to get anywhere is to just decide to be a student, mm-hmm. right? So I figured, well, I'll just apply there to go to school. But before I could apply there, I needed to show that I could actually do academic work, because I hadn't done a very good job my first couple of semesters. See, this is one of the stories I tell some of my students, is that, it's not where you are, it's where you wind up.
Yeah.
It's great to fall down. Not great, but it's okay to fall down. You pick yourself up. And if you've never picked yourself up before, it's really hard to know if you can. But once you've picked yourself up, then all of a sudden, the sky opens up and you say, oh, I can fall down and then get up. Mm-hmm. How cool is that? So I went down to, I had been taking Spanish classes in City University of New York at night, working a lot to make my rent, mm-hmm. and whatnot, and it occurred to me that it would be so much more interesting if I were to just go to Mexico and learn Spanish instead of sitting in New York and taking classes. Mm-hmm. And I had enough money, say, set aside. I could live in Mexico for the winter for half or a quarter of what I was paying in rent in New York. So and this is revealing something else, I bicycled down to Florida and then took a flight over to Mexico.
Naturally. As you do.
Yeah. But that bicycle trip, which was the second really, really long trip I had made, the first one was across the U.S. from here to Minneapolis. But that trip was my first occasion to go through South Carolina. So my first exposure was to South Carolina, was breaking down with my bicycle in Cottageville, South Carolina, which is a few clicks away from Waldorf.
Yeah.
And a guy gave me a ride to a bike shop, and I went on my way. Never imagined I would be seeing South Carolina again anytime soon, or that I would wind up living here, right? I was just pedaling through. So anyway, so I got down to Mexico, came back from Mexico, went over to Israel, enrolled in the Hebrew University there, decided that, I'm going to learn Hebrew as well as Spanish by being a Spanish major in Israel, but I needed another language, and I started to study Chinese. So Chinese came on the ticket. And so I was a double major in East Asian Studies, focusing on Chinese, and then Spanish literature, and picked up Hebrew pretty fluently in the mix, and then decided that it was time to go to graduate school because there wasn't much I could do with that degree. Sometimes you have a degree and you look at it and you say, well, what am I going to do with this?
Yeah.
And you have to go further. So I did go further. I went over to Taiwan. I spent a year in Taiwan studying Chinese to get my Chinese better. I applied to graduate school. I wound up going to Cornell for East Asian literature, with a specialization in Chinese literature. But that's when the turning point happened. That's when I realized about, most of the way through a master's degree in Chinese literature, that it was really language itself that I was interested in, not any particular. It's like interested in all languages, but all languages, not any particular one or two.
Yeah.
And so that's when I moved my degree program, finished my MA in Chinese literature, and moved into linguistics at Cornell. And spent another 4 years, 2 years for the MA, another 4 years to get a PhD. And by the time I was done, I had also, by the way, started Japanese.
So just collecting all the languages.
Yeah, these requirements are a little bit funny, because as a student of Chinese literature at Cornell, every student of Chinese literature in the program had to take at least 2 years of Japanese, and every student of Japanese literature on the program had to take at least 2 years of Chinese. They wanted you to learn both languages.
Yeah.
So, me being me, I said, well, what's 2 years of a language? That's nothing, So I'd take 4. And then I would go to Japan for a year and get better at it, of course. And I wound up doing my dissertation on Japanese grammar, on Japanese syntax. So it was a real, you see this circuitous pathway. But came out with Japanese under my belt, did a bunch of one-year jobs. I taught 1 year at Indiana University, 1 year at University of Iowa, 1 year in Madison, Wisconsin, 1 year I was over in Santa Cruz, University of California. 1 year, the year before I got here, I was at the Florida International University down in Miami.
Okay.
And then I got hired up here. And that was in 1991.
And then you're stuck here.
And I'm here since. That's right. And we're now in 2022, and it's 31 years on. But yeah, it's, I was telling some people today when we were interviewing our scholarship contenders, someone asked the question, well, what do you think about here? Why did you stay here? And basically, I would say that every year I've been here has been 1 year better than the last year. You couldn't pay me to leave.
Oh, that's amazing.
Honestly, you could not pay me to leave. I came, I grew up around New York. And I would have to say, you could name any number, and there would be probably no number you could name that would get me to move out of here and move back up there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I would. My sister lives up there. We go to visit. I wouldn't want to live there. I wouldn't want to live there. We live close by in town. We live, 5-6 minutes away from the campus. And, my kids were born here. They grew up here. lived, actually, as it happens, have lived on the same block for the entire 31 years.
Oh, wow.
Here, we never moved off the block. We rented a place, and after 3 years, somebody, a neighbor of ours, told us that their uncle had passed and that we should buy that house. And he was going to tell his cousins to sell us the house. And that's how we stayed on the block.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's an amazing adventure, the whole thing, you know. I mean, and when you look back on it, you say, wow, that was really cool. I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed that, you know, tranche of my life. You know,
Yeah.
So, yeah, but it's not over yet.
So,
Yes.
if you had to explain, and I'm sure some people have never heard of linguistics before, so that's
Right.
fitting.
Sure.
If you had to explain linguistics to somebody who had never heard of the concept of
Sure.
it, how would you do so?
How would I do it? Okay, so first of all, you've already got the idea that linguistics is about languages. So,
Yeah.
so we're halfway there, right? And about lots of languages, not just about one language. But I think I've told you this before. And one of the things, and let me just stop for a second and say this. People who are not experts in chemistry or physics or astronomy or biology will take the word of a biologist or a chemist about what is true or false about the world of living things, let's say in biology. People are less inclined to take the word of a linguist because everybody thinks they know how language works. And why is that? Because everybody uses language every day. And one of the things that I say when I'm confronted with that is I say, look, you use language every day like you use your wristwatch. Yes, you can tell time. Good for you. You know how to tell time. You know how to use a watch. Wonderful. Now, let's take the back off of the watch. And I'm going to have you look at the insides of that watch with its springs and the gears and everything flipping back and forth. And I'm going to ask you to explain to me how it works. You're going to be lost. You won't be able to explain to me how a watch works. How your own watch works.
Yeah.
Similarly, I don't think that the average person could explain to me how their own language works. Right? So what does linguistics do? Linguistics looks at how language works. And that's from every perspective. That's from the perspective of how we speak, the sounds we make, the phonology of a language. That's how we understand the meanings of words, how words are categorized, how we put words together into sentences, and further than that, how we actually use language. We use language in ways that we're not machines.
Yeah.
Right? You'll ask your friend, did you take out the garbage? And what you mean is, I hope you did, and I want you to if you didn't.
Yeah.
You didn't. You asked a yes/no question, but you are not expecting, and you would be very perturbed if someone gave you a yes/no answer.
Yeah.
Like if you asked your friend, "Did you take out the garbage?" and they looked at you with a kind of deadpan expression, said no. That would not go down well, right?
Yeah.
So that's just a simple example of how language meaning shifts. There's the meaning of sentences and words, and then there's the meaning of sentences and words when they're dropped into a conversation and they start to mean different things. So you could study linguistics from any one of those aspects.
Yeah.
Right?
So could you explain maybe one of your favorite aspects of linguistics? Like just break down one of the fundamental aspects.
Favorite aspects of linguistics? Well, okay. What I find most fascinating about language in my own area, is analysis of grammar. Okay, I look at grammatical constructions, and I'm not talking about where to put apostrophes or don't split infinitives or other kind of nonsense like that. I'm talking about what we do with language that we're not even aware of. Right? So, in fact, this is fresh in my mind because I was just talking to somebody about this today. There are ing verbs, like reading.
Yeah.
You have the verb read and you have ing reading. And we use ing verbs as nouns. And we have various expressions that we can use with ing verbs. So we can say, his reading of that book.
Mm-hmm.
I can knock out the of, and I can say his reading that book. Still okay. And sometimes I can say him reading that book.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I can say his reading of that book pleased us greatly. His reading that book pleased us greatly. Him reading that book pleased us greatly. Right? All those work.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So here we are. Now, once, and I'm just going to take this forward 2 more steps.
Mm-hmm.
So one step is that you can take all those phrases that I just gave you, him, his, whatever, reading of that book, and I can put it after a preposition.
Mm-hmm.
I can say, despite his reading of that book, we had a good time. Despite his reading that book, we had a good time. Despite him reading that book, we had a good time. We're still okay. We're all, everything I said just makes sense, and, it fits. Okay. Now I'm going to give you 3 more,
Mm-hmm.
and the last one is going to be a little bit weird. After his reading of that book, we went to lunch.
Mm-hmm.
After his reading the book, we went to lunch.
Mm-hmm.
After him reading the book, we went to lunch. And that sounds weird. The last one should sound weird.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and I have a whole paper that I did with somebody, here's a 20-page paper from 1995 on that. Well, it wasn't exactly only on that.
Yeah.
But that was the tip-off that something's odd here. What's going on that's odd? Well, what we figured out was, and I'll step through this and I'm going to make it real quick because I don't want to give a whole paper, but I'll say this. So what we figured out was that there are prepositions that are temporal. In other words, have to do with time. After, before, while, during, whatever. Then there are prepositions that are not temporal, like despite, without, about. Okay? Now the him reading the book phrase is perfectly fine after any non-temporal preposition, despite, without, about. But when you put it after a temporal preposition, like while, before, or after, it fails. That's really strange.
Yeah.
Why did that happen? Well, we dug back, literally dug back and found that temporal prepositions in the English language changed in ways that the non-temporal prepositions didn't change 250 years before.
Oh, wow.
Very well.
Yeah.
So by the time of the King James Bible, 1611, the status and how temporal prepositions were being used had shifted away from non-temporal prepositions. Non-temporal prepositions sort of caught up in a weird way, but not until 100 years ago.
Okay.
50 years ago even.
Yeah.
Right? So what did we discover? We found something really odd. Like, how come that sounds good and how come that doesn't sound good? We dug deeper and found that there's a pattern there. We dug even deeper and found that pattern is tied up to like some historical changes in English, and bang, we found out something that nobody had ever observed before about English. And I can assure you that nobody before had ever observed this about English, because they wouldn't have published it if somebody else had gotten to it first, right?
Exactly.
So these are the kinds of really, really fascinating discoveries that you get to make. And I've worked on English, as I said. I'm working with Korean students on Korean. I've got a paper that I'm revising with another student of mine on ancient Greek, classical Greek. I've got another paper going out into Journal of Slavic Linguistics coming out this spring with another student on Russian. If you can give me a language, I'll find something interesting and we'll write about it.
Amazing.
Yeah, it is wonderful. It is absolutely wonderful. Yeah.
And I think that's something that I really appreciate about the work that you do, is that you'll find like very, very small things and make an entire project out of that. So I know you were working on, I think, a textbook on the etymology of the word sandwich.
Yeah, I've written, it's not a textbook.
Okay.
But I'll tell you about that if you like.
Of course.
Of course. Okay. So here's what happens. And this is another, all these stories are so circuitous. one of the things that has been, that has worked for me all the way through my time here is to be open to things. To say yes. Right? I mean, there are people who, are dug in and they're really focused on their own work and they don't want to be disturbed and they don't, and if you knock on their door, they say, go away. Right?
Yeah.
I never say go away.
Yeah.
I never, ever, ever say go away. I may say, can you come back in another couple of hours or maybe next week, but I'll never say go away. Because go away is the wrong thing to say. Go away closes the doors to all sorts of pathways that you don't know where these things are going to go. So what happens is 2 honor students, this goes back several years, had been casting about for a thesis director, and time was getting short for them because it was the spring semester of their senior year.
Oh, wow.
They had not managed to get a director for some idea that they had in the business school, and they came to Elaine Shun, who's in linguistics, who's my colleague in linguistics, who's a wonderful, brilliant linguist. Take a course with her if you haven't. I mean, I really mean that. And Elaine put out a message. They approached her, and she said, well, I really can't work with you, but she put out a message to all the other linguistics faculty and described, well, these 2 guys are wanting to do a project. It's really late in the semester for them. Is anybody interested? And I wrote them back, and I said, and their topic was they wanted to write a thesis on the meaning of the word sandwich. And I kind of rolled my eyes a little bit to myself and said, that's not going to be anything, but there's something there. So I wrote them back, and I said, I appreciate your pushing the envelope a little bit. You've got some imagination. Let's talk.
Yeah.
And they were very excited, and they said, "Oh yeah, we're going to come around, and we'll work with like we're so excited to be able to work with you." I said, "Okay, let's wait till we talk. Don't work on anything until we talk. We need to figure out what you're going to write." And so they came to see me, and it was late in the spring. It was in the middle of the spring semester. It might have been like around now, around February or something like that. End of February, and I sat them down. I said, "Look, I like your idea, but it needs to be work. It needs to be more than this. It needs to be more than what you think it is. So, first of all, let's get something straight. You're not going to graduate in May if you're going to do your thesis with me.
Yeah.
You're going to graduate in August if you work really hard. So, if you're okay with that, I'll let you sign on. I'll sign on to work with you, and let's see where it goes." So I worked with them to frame the project and different things about the word and the history of the word and how it's used and a little bit about meaning and all kinds of good stuff. And they did what I thought was a decent thesis. And after helping them frame it and flesh it out, I looked at what they had done. I said, that would be a really interesting book.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, what would it be if you took one word, and if you could learn as much as you could about the world through one word.
Through one word.
Right. So the title of the book tentatively is Sandwich, a Word's Eye View of Language, Food, and Meaning. And it goes through a lot of stuff. It traces the word in the English language all the way back to the Indo-European tribes that were wandering around the Caspian Pontic steppes of Eurasia into Europe and into England and out from England, and borrowing of words around the world, and how we got to have sandwiches, because interestingly enough, there are lots of grains in the world that have been domesticated, but only barley and wheat. And those sorts of grains have gluten in them.
Yeah.
And you need gluten to combine with yeast to make bread, because nothing rises if you don't have gluten. And so rice cultures don't get to have bread, and corn cultures don't get to have bread. So you have to have, first of all, culture in a grain that gets bread. And so it tells the whole story.
Yeah.
I finished that. It's been reviewed. I have some rewriting to do, some serious rewriting to do. Yeah. And hopefully it'll see the light of day.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Do you have any other projects you're working on currently?
Yeah, 2 big ones.
2 big ones.
2 big ones. One is a project called the Language Conflict Project. Going back 10, 12 years. My colleague, co-author for 30 years, Bill Davies out in Iowa, and I started to work on a book called Language Conflict and Language Rights, looking at linguistic conflict in places like where the Catalans in Spain, or the Kurdish people in Turkey, and we have, I don't have to speak very abstractly about that, we have a language conflict going on right now between the Ukrainian speakers and the Russian speakers in that part of the world, and they're fighting a war, right? And wars break out over cultural differences. Not to say that this is why the war broke out. It has a lot to do with a lot of other things. But you have Russian speakers and you have Ukrainian speakers, and they identify differently according to their language. So we're looking at intrastate, mostly intrastate language conflict. And we wrote a book called Language Conflict and Language Rights, which was developed in the course of developing a course called Language Conflict and Language Rights, which I taught, which I teach on a regular basis here now, and it gets taught by other people as well. It's the only course I know of, the only linguistics course I know of that's cross-listed as a political science and linguistics course. So it is both. And so we're developing an encyclopedia of language conflicts. We're looking for linguistic distance measures. We're trying to see if we can find objective ways to measure how similar or different languages are from each other, along with a bunch of different vectors, word differences, lexical differences, phonological differences, grammatical differences, and so on. Because we think that there's a lot to be learned if you try to correlate differences with conflicts. We don't know whether. We're developing something called a language freedom index, similar to like a democracy index or a press freedom index, where we can objectively measure how minority language populations are treated in the countries where those people live, which is, we think, important. So that's one project. The other project, which I'm also just as excited about, is a digital project to develop an online spelling application, which will service children from kindergarten, first, second, third grade. A gamified instructional system that will gamify spelling, take spelling out of the hands of teachers entirely, let kids play a game and learn to spell.
Amazing.
And we have that pretty much, functionally it's in development. It hasn't been gamified yet. We have some grant applications out to try to test its effectiveness. But the holy grail of that particular project would be, and we're very far from it yet, would be first grader types his or her little compositions or whatever they're typing in Word on a computer or a laptop. Word or whatever word processor they're using, of course, as you know, has something called spell check. Well, if it has spell check, then the program is keeping track of the misspelled words. And if it kept track of the misspelled words, it could easily port or send those errors to a spelling game platform. So the next time that first grader goes on to play their spelling game, the spelling game tests them on the words that they made mistakes on, instead of wasting their time on a zillion words that they already know. Right? So we think that that's going to... The key thing here is that there are lots of spelling helps. There's lots of help. You can get spelling coaches. You can get Orton Gillingham guidance, but those things cost $50 to $100 an hour to get somebody to come in and help your kid. And there are many, too many kids in this country whose parents can't afford $100 an hour for 5 or 6 hours a week to work with their kids. So we want to develop something which will actually promote and develop literacy for kids everywhere. And one of the other tweaks involved in this program is we're trying to incorporate dialect into it. So that kids who have dialect pronunciation, Southern American English, African American English pronunciations of words, get to hear how they say the word in conjunction with how mainstream English pronunciations go, so that they can kind of match their own pronunciations to the mainstream pronunciations to the spelled form. And we think that might actually help kids get a lot more literate a lot faster. So if you move literacy, everything gets better.
No, that's amazing.
If you can get people to read, I mean, everything is better. Science is better, history is better, math is better, everything, right?
And it's amazing because I think in a lot of like educational outlets, the dialect differentiations get totally overlooked.
They get overlooked.
They need to be respected.
Right. Well, it's not even just respect. It's awareness. So if you take a kid, let's take a kid here in the South. I mean, you can go different places, have different kinds of pronunciations. So in New York, they say sauce, and that could be SOURCE or SAUCE. Sauce, right? Here in the South, pen. Yeah. There's a stick pen and an ink pen, but it's homophonous. They're both pen. Now, you take a child, first grader, second grader, who has only heard PEN and PIN pronounced the same by their parents, by their friends, by their teachers, everywhere. Pray tell, how are they going to ever learn to spell the two words differently, right? They're going to guess. And it's going to be a little harder for them because their dialect pronunciation is going to get in the way. But if you told that child, well, you see what I have here that I'm going to write with, it's a pen. It's also pronounced pen. Oh, well, now I heard it two ways. Now I can connect the spelling with the way I say it and with another way of saying it. Maybe it'll help me remember it. Maybe it'll help me become a better speller and then a better reader. So that's where we're going with that. Yeah. It's I'm excited about it.
No,
Nobody's
that's
done
amazing.
it. Nobody's done it.
So to finish off with, I think we've definitely touched on it in a million different ways.
Yeah, sure.
But why do you think that the average person should care about linguistics?
Because language is what makes us human. Basically that. Yeah. Language is what makes us human. And if we understand language better, we will understand ourselves better, we will understand each other better. I mean, one of the problems that we have with language, and as I said at the very, very beginning, I said, everyone uses language, and because they all use language, they think they know about it. But they don't, and they need to learn about it. For example, they need to learn that there are no beautiful nor ugly ways of speaking. That there's just language, and languages and people's varieties of language are different from each other, and everyone is independent from each other, and they don't have any inherent properties other than they're different. And if we can, start to understand that, if we can start to understand that you speak differently than I do, and I speak differently than you do, and I like how I speak, and I identify myself by how I speak, as do you. We can respect those differences, but we don't have to judge each other by how we use language. And that's probably one of the biggest things that you see now in terms of one of the biggest hurdles in understanding is that people judge each other by how they use language. People speak a foreign language, oh, that's not good, they should be speaking English. Or people speak a different dialect, oh, they sound so uneducated, or whatever. In other words, none of these value judgments are legitimate. But I can't even begin to show you that unless I teach you about linguistics and language. Right? So that's hopefully everyone wants to take a linguistics course because of this.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
This has been 101. I'm your host, DJ Placebo. Thank you to Dr. Stan for coming in.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yay! And we actually got it this time.
We got it?
It's amazing.